Hello, and thank you for joining us today in our study of the 5 single-chapter books of Scripture. Today we come to the book of 2nd John. Now, as we talked about in our video reading through 2nd John, it is a very short book. It is a letter that is written from the Apostle John to the elect lady, and it seems to be written toward the end of the first century. There's a lot of meat in these few verses of the book of 2nd John, and more than we're going to be able to deeply delve into today. But I'd like us to take just a couple minutes and look at some of the key points within the message of the book of 2nd John. I want us to begin in verses 5 and 6, where after his basic introductions to the elect lady and her children, and we could have discussions on who those are. Some believe it's an actual individual, some believe that he's writing to the church, but whichever way, the principles of what is being discussed is going to be the same. And so he begins by talking about this commandment that we have, and it's not a new commandment, but it is the commandment to love one another. He says, "And now I plead with you, lady, not as though I wrote a new commandment to you, but that which we had from the beginning, that we love one another. This is love, that we walk according to his commandments. This is the commandment, that as you have heard from the beginning, you should walk in it." Now, something very interesting in this particular section, because John here says that the commandment is to love one another. And so we are to be those, and we read this over and over again: treat others the way you want to be treated, do all of these various things. In 1 John chapter 4, John is going to spend basically an entire chapter talking about the importance of us loving one another and the reasons for it. But I want you to notice something interesting in verse 6. He says, "This is love, that we walk according to his commandments." Our love for one another, if we truly love one another, is going to be based upon and is going to be seen in the principles of keeping the commandments of God. Because the commandments of God are what are going to drive us to do the right thing, to make the right choices, to deal with people in the correct way, to have the right associations, and all of these various things. And so there are many people who talk about loving one another as a means of dropping those things aside in order to emotionally appease one another. Whereas John says that truly loving one another is going to mean keeping the commandments of God. And that those commandments, being a part of the relationship that we have for one another, is what is truly going to show our love for one another. And so it's a very strong concept of the necessity of obedience to God, even within our love for each other. As you drop down a little bit further, a couple more verses, you get to a statement that he's going to make in verse number 9, where he says, "Whoever transgresses and does not abide in the doctrine of Christ does not have God. He who abides in the doctrine of Christ has both the Father and the Son." So the question becomes, who does not have God? Now, it's not who does God not want to have. That's a different question. And the answer is nobody. But who does not have God? And John says it is whoever transgresses and does not abide in the doctrine of Christ. And so when it comes to the teachings of the New Testament, which is the doctrine of Christ, when it comes to the things that Christ commanded and that Christ gave the apostles, which were then passed on to us, if we do not abide in those things, if we begin teaching other things, if we stop believing in those things, John says we do not have God. God is not on our side. There are many people today who have the tendency to believe that it doesn't matter what you believe, what you practice, how you live, none of those things matter. As long as you believe in Jesus, God is on your side. And while we definitely have to believe in Jesus, he talks about in a previous verse about those who do not believe that Jesus came in the flesh are an antichrist. They are ones who are working against Christ. We have to believe that Jesus came in the flesh, but we also cannot transgress the doctrine of Christ. We have to abide in what Jesus taught and the principles that he and his disciples, by inspiration, lay out before us. Those things are important. They're not just there as minutia. They're not just there as a means of allowing people to think whatever they want to think. There are specific realities and specific statements that are found in Scripture that cannot be avoided. And so we have to make sure that we know what those things are, that we know what the doctrine of Christ says and what it is that it requires of us, because otherwise we will not have God. And then you have the sentiment of verses 10 and 11, where there John, in writing to these individuals, states that if anyone comes to you and does not bring this doctrine, do not receive him into your house nor greet him, for he who greets him shares in his evil deeds. Now, what John is not saying is that you should not try to teach an individual who doesn't already believe the right thing. Nor is he saying that you should never have any interaction with anybody who has ever done anything wrong. But what he is saying is the idea of greeting here is the idea of fellowship or kinship, and treating someone like they're a part of the family. What he does say is that we have to be careful who we allow to influence us, but also who we allow to act as though and to be around us as though everything is okay and they're doing everything just right. Because he says whoever greets one of these people in that type of a sense partakes in what it is they teach and what they practice. The principle that John is laying out is that we have to be careful who we give our full fellowship and association to. Now, there are those that have taken this too far to the point that you can't hardly talk to or deal with or be around anybody, and that's not what John's talking about. But remember, these are people who do not, in the context, who do not even believe in Jesus, who don't believe in the things that Jesus taught or the things that Jesus did. He says, you be careful. He says, don't let them have free reign in your life. Don't let them appear as though they are on an equal plane in the way that you feel about what is right and what is truth and what is good, because it will leave the wrong impression. Now, it doesn't mean we have to be rude, and it doesn't mean that we have to be those that are mean or hateful or anything else, because we shouldn't be. But instead it does mean we're careful as to who we place as those that we trust and those that we welcome into our lives with open arms for the influence that they give and for the things that they help with. Because those things are going to be important and they're going to be telling about us. So there are several things that John talks about and that he warns about here in this very short book. I hope that some of these things are beneficial to you. Next time, Lord willing, we will come back and we will begin looking at the book of 3 John. I hope that you'll join us then. But until then, have a great day.